Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the haunted houses, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My husband and I moved into the house we currently live in a little over 4 years ago. We live on Long Island, New York, in a very old colonial house built in 1907. Ever since moving in, we've experienced some very strange things. The first experience still freaks me out to this day. I left work early as I was sick with a cold. I went straight upstairs to our bedroom to take a nap. After lying in bed for a few short minutes, I heard the sound of someone coming up the stairs, clear as day footsteps on each step. Now our staircase has 2 sets of stairs with a landing in between. So the entity made its way slowly up the first set, paused for a moment, and then the second set. Our bedroom door sits at the top of the stairs. Whatever it was, it just stopped right at our door. I rationalized it as my husband coming home from work, but it didn't make sense, as he wouldn't be due to come home for another hour and a half. And in my heart, I knew it wasn't him. I genuinely got such a scared feeling my entire body stiffened up and all of my senses heightened. Later, when my husband did come home, I asked him if he came home early and then maybe went downstairs again and told him what I heard. He said that no, he just got home, but he didn't quite believe me. Well, about a month later, he experienced the same thing. He was home from work alone and laid down to take a nap when he heard footsteps coming up the stairs. He then started believing that we weren't alone in the house. In 2021, we had our baby, a boy, and one night I was up breastfeeding him. I used to go downstairs to our living room so that my husband could sleep as he went back to work after paternity leave. So I'm sitting on my big, comfy armchair, snuggling our newborn who fell asleep in my arms, when I suddenly hear footsteps upstairs, clear as day, footsteps in our upstairs hallway. I freeze and listen carefully, knowing that I didn't hear our bedroom door open, so it couldn't be my husband. Oddly enough, about 10 minutes later, my husband does get up to use the bathroom, and I call up to him and ask if he was up before. To which he says no, he just got up to use the restroom. I was so creeped out that I refused to breastfeed downstairs anymore and only did it in our bedroom from then on. The last big thing that happened involved my mother, who lives out of state and was coming to visit and babysit for us to give us our first official date night out since having our son. We got home after dinner and my mum looked horrified. She said that she was sitting in the rocking chair while my son was asleep in her arms when suddenly she heard footsteps outside the bedroom door and then 3 loud bangs against it, like someone was banging their fist against it angrily. She said she jumped right up and opened the door to check, but that no one was there. She anxiously awaited our arrival back and has been afraid to stay with us ever since. Since then, we've experienced little things here and there, but it seems the activity has died down for now. My son is older and has told us that the walls in his room talk to him, which is a statement which has profoundly creeped us out, but we try and tell ourselves it's a toddler's overactive imagination. I also want to add one more thing that may or may not be related to what I've already experienced. One day a few months ago, we were eating dinner with my son, and out of nowhere he told us that he played with his grandpa yesterday. So we assumed he meant my dad, as my husband's father unfortunately passed away several years ago. When I asked him what he meant, because we hadn't seen my dad in a while, he said, "No, not that grandpa. My other grandpa." My husband and I looked at each other and asked him what this grandpa looked like. He said he looks like a girl with long hair and he had wings that flew up into the sky. My husband's dad was a musician and had had long hair all his life. I kid you not, we were so freaked out, but also relieved. Like maybe this ghost was his grandpa looking out for us. I'm not so sure, but it's certainly one of the craziest things to ever happen to us. My name is Matt, and I'm from the UK. I live just outside of Birmingham on a council estate. For those unfamiliar, a council estate in the UK is somewhat akin to the projects in the USA, government-subsidized housing. The estate I live on isn't particularly old. The houses were built in the 40s or 50s, and from what I know there haven't been many occupants before us. Our house is a modest 2-bedroom with spacious front and back gardens. For the first 2 years everything was completely normal. The house never had a menacing or intimidating feel to it, nor did I ever sense any unusual energy. It was just an ordinary home. Until the summer of 2020. Around July or August of that year, right in the midst of the COVID pandemic, things started to change. What followed over the next 2 to 3 months were a series of events that still gives me the chills when I think about them. The first incident might seem insignificant on its own, but it's worth mentioning as it begins the strange occurrences in our home. Let me take you back to a night. It was quite late. My partner and I were in bed when we heard knocking. At first it seemed like it was coming from outside, but the strangest part was that it sounded like it was coming from the other side of the bedroom wall. Now here's the thing. There's nothing on the other side of that wall. If someone or something had been knocking where we thought the sound was coming from, they would have to have been suspended about 20 feet in the air. The knocking continued for a while, following a pattern with brief pauses before resuming. It wasn't loud or aggressive, but it had a distinctly human quality to it, like someone gently tapping. We were both puzzled and a bit uneasy, trying to figure out how the sound could be coming from such an impossible location. In the end, we brushed it off as one of those unexplainable oddities and went to sleep. It's important to note that this has never happened again since that night. The next incident was at around 11 PM on a weeknight, just an ordinary evening with no strange occurrence leading up to it, at least none that I can recall. My partner and I were in the bedroom when our Ring doorbell suddenly went off, chiming as if someone was walking past. Now our driveway is quite long, and the Ring is set up to pick up motion only when someone is well up the pathway within a specific range. This made the alert unusual, as it's never happened before or since without a clear cause. Instantly on edge, I got out of bed and peered out the window. Living on a council estate in England, it's not uncommon to encounter some colourful characters late at night. But I saw nothing. No one was on the front garden path and everything seemed quiet. The front light, however, had been triggered, which wasn't too unusual given the wildlife that sometimes roams around. But as I turned to my partner to comment on the strange alert, we were both startled by a loud, forceful bang on our bedroom door. The door was shut, and it sounded as if someone had slammed their open fist right against it, and it sounded like someone had slammed their fist against it in the middle of the frame. The door did not open, but it shook with enough force that I could feel the impact. I was close enough to it that I felt a wave of fear wash over me, while my partner, oddly enough, burst into a nervous laughter. When I asked her what she found funny, she admitted she didn't know. It was just a gut reaction to the sudden shock. I opened the door expecting to find something, but the hallway was empty. My daughter, who was around 3 or 4 at the time, was asleep in her cot, and our cat was sitting calmly in the hallway staring at me, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The timing of the Ring doorbell alerts, just seconds before this loud bang, left us both feeling incredibly uneasy. Although nothing else happened that night, the tension lingered, making it hard to shake the feeling that something was off. The Ring doorbell did capture footage, but it showed nothing unusual, just an empty path, though something clearly set off the motion sensor. Adding to the creepiness was the specific alert on my phone. Instead of the usual, There's motion outside your front door notification which typically triggers when something is at the edge of the detection range. This time it read, "Someone is at your front door." The specificity of that alert, given what followed, made the whole experience 10 times scarier. The next incident I recall happened one evening while my partner was out for a driving lesson. It was around 5 p.m, the sky was still bright and the weather pleasant. I was downstairs on my computer chatting with some friends on Discord when I decided to go upstairs and use the toilet. As I head back down the stairs, I suddenly heard the sound of running water. I was around halfway down when the noise registered, and I remember feeling a mix of confusion and alarm. My first thought was that something in the kitchen might be leaking. I reached the bottom of the stairs and glanced towards the kitchen, thinking maybe my partner had turned the washing machine on before she left for her driving lesson. As I stepped into the hallway and looked directly into the kitchen, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Both tap handles were pushed fully forwards and the water was gushing out of our faucet at full blast. My cat was sitting calmly on the kitchen floor, staring at me like nothing were out of the ordinary. I was quite freaked out. In a panic, I video called my mum on WhatsApp. I had already mentioned the previous incidents to my family, but they had mostly shrugged them off as nothing significant. But when my mum saw the taps wide open, she freaked out too. I think I needed someone to witness what was happening in real time to validate my own fear. Once again, my daughter was upstairs in her cot fast asleep, and the baby monitor was with me downstairs. Everything seemed normal on that front. But the whole situation had me on edge. I felt trapped in the house, anxiously waiting for my partner to return from her lesson. When she finally did, I told her what had happened, and we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the water pressure. We thought that somehow it caused the taps to turn on by themselves, but it's worth noting that this had never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. Even my friends on the Discord thought the whole thing was bizarre and stayed on the chat with me until my partner returned. A short while later, another unsettling event occurred. I had gone to visit my nan who lives about a 10-minute drive away from our house. It was the early evening, and we were sitting in her living room having a cup of tea when my partner called me, clearly distressed. She told me that she had been in the kitchen washing up when the baby monitor started acting up, flickering, distorting and showing visual noise. Then she heard a massive bang on our front door, so loud and forceful that it immediately woke up our daughter, who began crying in her cot. My partner said it sounded as if someone had thrown something heavy at the door or run up the driveway and slammed it with great force. This really freaked her out, and I rushed home to check the CCTV. But when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing. No one outside, no movement captured. The Ring doorbell hadn't been triggered either. We tried to stay rational, but given everything that had happened before, we were struggling not to let fear take over. My partner said the most unsettling part was how our daughter woke up crying the moment the bang occurred. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that came with it, like something was very wrong. By this point, the strange occurrences in our home had become sporadic, but frequent enough to keep us on edge. My partner began experiencing unsettling moments, like hearing knocking on closed bathroom doors. The knocks weren't aggressive or loud, but they were distinct enough to be unnerving. At night, we'd hear bumps and bangs downstairs, and every suspicious sound seemed to amplify our growing paranoia. The atmosphere in the house had become thick with tension. We were both on edge, and it felt like the anxiety in our home was feeding on itself. We began arguing more frequently, which could have been due to a combination of pandemic stress, the fear from these strange events, or perhaps just general pressure of everything happening around us. Whatever the cause, it was clear that these incidents were taking a toll on our relationship and sense of peace. While there wasn't a single standout event during this time, it's important to note that these little things were happening constantly. Interestingly, the knocks on the door seemed to be something my partner experienced more than I did, especially when she was alone in the bathroom. I never heard the knocking myself when I was alone, But I did notice strange behavior with our baby monitor during the night, particularly when my partner was working night shifts at the local city hospital. The baby monitor would often have interference or visual glitches that made it nearly unusable. Sometimes it would become so distorted that I'd turn it off for a few minutes hoping to reset it, but that rarely solved the problem. These disturbances, though small on their own, added up to a growing sense of unease that we couldn't shake. Further down the line, it was around 3 a.m. and I was wide awake, watching Netflix in bed. I glanced over at the baby monitor on our bedside table to check on my daughter, and that's when I saw it. A white mist moving across the screen. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, so I kept watching. My jaw dropped when the unmistakable silhouette of someone moving through my daughter's bedroom was what I saw. The figure walked up to the side of her cot, looked in, then walked away, only to repeat the same motion over and over. This wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a clear, human-shaped silhouette, with distinct arms and legs moving as if it were a person pacing around the room. I couldn't make out any features to determine if it was a man or woman, but the way it moved was eerily natural, as if it were a living person checking on my daughter. Her bedroom backs onto our garden, surrounded by other gardens on all sides. There's no roads where a passing car could cast headlights into the room, so there was no rational explanation for what I was seeing. The layout of our home and the surrounding area made it impossible for this to be a reflection or an outside window. Terrified, I shook my partner awake. She was understandably annoyed at being woken up in the middle of the night, but I was so scared I couldn't even speak. I was afraid that if I said anything out loud, we might somehow attract the attention of whatever was in the room with our daughter. Instead, I grabbed my phone and frantically typed out what I was seeing. I typed out and told her we needed to get our daughter and leave the house, and go to my mother's immediately. She refused, demanding to know what was going on. I handed her the phone, still too shaky to say a word, and pointed at the baby monitor. We both watched in stunned silence as the silhouette continued its routine, walking up to the cot, stopping, then walking away, only to repeat the process. This went on for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably just a few minutes. What happened next still amazes me. Here I was, the supposed man of the house, too frightened to even speak, while my partner suddenly jumped out of bed and ran straight into our daughter's bedroom. I grabbed an aluminium baseball bat from beside the bed and followed her, though in hindsight I had no idea what I would accomplish with it. My partner burst into our daughter's room fearless, and we were both to find everything perfectly normal. Our daughter was fast asleep, the room was still, and there were no signs of anything unusual. We checked the room thoroughly. Nothing seemed out of place, and there was no bad or menacing energy. We returned to our bedroom, where we checked the baby monitor again. The silhouette was still there, but it was fading, growing, and more translucent until it eventually vanished. I have no idea how he managed to fall asleep that night. I was desperate to leave and go to the sanctity of my mother's house, but my partner insisted we stay. It was our home after all. It's worth noting that this had never happened before and it hasn't happened since, but the memory of that night still haunts me. At this point, it was my breaking point. Desperate for answers, I reached out to the vicar of my local church. He listened to my account and explained that what I was describing sounded like a poltergeist, a type of spirit known for causing disturbances. He also asked if I was involved in witchcraft, black magic, or any occult practices, and I assured him that I wasn't. The vicar suggested that the disturbance might be connected to my daughter. At the time, she was around 4 years old. He theorized that she might have been experiencing or feeling emotion she couldn't yet understand or articulate, which could manifest as poltergeist activity. He explained that a poltergeist is a typical trickster feeding off energy it provokes and not necessarily malevolent. Instead, It's often a manifestation of emotional energy, particularly from children undergoing significant stages of stress. The previous occupant of the house, an elderly lady, had passed away there. I was told this information by a neighbour, and the vicar suggested that her spirit might still be present and could benefit from assistance in moving on. He offered to visit the home to perform prayers and blessings to the house to help any lingering spirits leave this world, and provided me with some prayers to say in my daughter's room every night. I agreed to contact him again if anything else occurred, and thanked him for his guidance. It's worth noting that my partner was hesitant about these measures, concerned that they might make things worse. And this is where the story ends. Since contacting the vicar, the activity in our home abruptly ceased. We had a few odd occurrences since then, but nothing comparable to the level of activity we had before. If any of these incidents had occurred in isolation, I may have dismissed them as just coincidence. However, the sequence and intensity of these events made it difficult to ignore the possibility of something meaningful linked to them. The baby monitor incident remains a particularly eerie piece of evidence. Despite our efforts to rationalize the experience, that one event continues to stand out as a profound mystery. The fact that both my partner and I witnessed it together, at the very least, is evidence enough for us that we did experience something that night. Those were the events that were definitely paranormal in my mind, but now there are other things which I'm not entirely sure about, and I'm interested to see what you'd make of them. So, there was this one incident where we were in bed, and it felt like something kicked the side of our bed forcefully, to the point where the double bed actually moved. My partner was understandably frightened, but I felt an overwhelming urge to check on our daughter. When we did, we found her cot drenched from a spilled drink, and she was extremely wet. Might this have been a warning to check on her, potentially preventing a more serious situation? Another peculiar moment occurred in the bathroom when I was overwhelmed by the scent of sweet-smelling perfume, the kind an elderly person might wear. Alarmed, I called my grandma to make sure she was okay, and she was. I wondered if the scent was a sign from her, perhaps a goodbye, and I'm thankful to know I was wrong. I've never had anything like that happen to me before or since. Throughout these events, our cat was often present. Despite her presence, she never exhibited unusual behavior that could explain the disturbances. While she has occasionally jumped against the bedroom door, her actions were always more like playful antics rather than the heavy, impactful noises we heard that first night after the Ring doorbell incident. That sound was a distinct, forceful bang, unlike anything our cat could have caused. I also haven't heard anything like that since, even when my cat has been playing and running around. One Sunday, before the intense period of disturbances we'd experienced, an unsettling incident occurred. It was close to my birthday, and I was bedridden with a particularly nasty virus, feeling both weak and disoriented. My partner went to our local supermarket to pick up a few items, and I was left at home hoping to recover in peace. She returned much sooner than expected, and when I asked why she was back so quickly, she revealed that the supermarket was closed, something she hadn't realized until making it halfway to the store. But what unsettled her was what happened on the way home. As she approached our house, she saw something disturbing at the bottom of our front garden path. A Sunday roast carvery fork, pointing directly towards our front door. She seemed visibly shaken as she described this odd sight. The fork had not been there when she left, and the path had been empty. Her memory of any other people in the area was hazy at best, and she hadn't seen anyone who could have left the fork behind. The reason she seemed so shaken was due to the fork not being there when she left and suddenly appearing when she returned. Obviously, a fork is just a fork. But this freaked her out. Now, initially, we brushed off the strange appearance of the fork, but my partner's unease lingered, especially because it had been positioned directly towards the front of our door. Wanting to document the oddity, I decided to call the non-emergency crime number and the police suggested we dispose of this fork responsibly, so I placed it in the bin, hoping it was just a one-off. The following Sunday passed without incident, but the eerie feeling didn't quite fade. It was the Sunday after when things took another unnerving turn. As I was reversing my car into the driveway, I noticed something glinting in the hedge next to the gate. My curiosity twinged as I initially thought it was a sweet wrapper glinting in the sunlight. But as I approached, I was stunned, as nestled neatly in the bush at eye level was a carvery knife from the same set of cutlery as the fork, and it was positioned deliberately where it would catch my attention each time I closed the gate and locked it. The sight of the knife, perfectly aligned and eerily placed, sent a shiver down my spine. It felt as though it was another deliberate message or warning. The knife's appearance in our hedge, paired with the earlier fork incident, seemed too deliberate to ignore. The fact that it was from the same set and placed so conspicuously made it clear that someone or something was trying to communicate or unsettle us. The pattern of those unsettling occurrences, each involving objects that seemed to have no business being there, continued to blur the lines between coincidence and something more sinister. Also, to note, in the UK we love a carvery. It's a big traditional Sunday meal, and both of these items appeared on separate Sundays. Needless to say, I contacted the police again to report the new development. This prompted us to take further action for our safety and peace of mind. We installed CCTV cameras on my property to monitor any unusual activity, hoping to catch any potential intruders or discover who was responsible for these unsettling incidents. In retrospect, we believe they were likely human in nature rather than paranormal. The deliberate placement of the cutlery suggested someone had a clear intention, and despite our best efforts, the CCTV did not reveal anything substantial about the person behind these events, and nothing like it has happened since. There was also a time when my partner was working night shifts at the city hospital, and my daughter was staying over at my mum's. I had the house to myself, which should have been a relief, but instead, it turned into another unsettling experience. I was jolted awake at 5 a.m. by a noise coming from my daughter's bedroom. At first, I was half asleep and trying to figure out what it could be. The sound was like a motorized mechanism, and then I heard a voice say, "Hello, friend?" By this point, I was wide awake and very alert. The mechanical noise continued, followed by a giggling, and then, "I like honey." The strange phrase and the repetitive sound kept going over and over. To my shock, I realized the source of the noise was an old Winnie the Pooh teddy bear that had been mine as a child, around 30 years old, and somehow still worked. My mum had given it to me when my daughter was born, and it had been placed on the top of her wardrobe. For the bear to speak, you have to firmly press down on its nose, which is what made this situation all the more baffling. Panic-stricken, I bolted to my car, rang my nan, and rushed over to her house. I couldn't stay another minute there, with that eerie bear. Later that day, I went back, retrieved the bear, and took it over to her house, where it has now found a new permanent home. We tested it to see if we could replicate the behavior, and sure enough, it went off again on its own. Interestingly, the bear doesn't do this anymore, and now works perfectly fine. For a brief moment, though, I genuinely thought something might be trying to communicate with me in the house. The "hello friend" and the creepy "ha ha ha" were unsettling to say the least. My grandma, who's 89 and has a great sense of humor, still finds this incident incredibly funny to this day. When it comes to the house itself, after some investigation, I managed to find the grandson of the elderly lady who lived in our house before us. I reached out to him through Facebook, hoping he might shed some light on the history of the house and any possible connections to the strange events we had been experiencing. He was very polite and open to discussing the house's past. I made sure to approach the conversation with respect, given the sensitive nature of the inquiry. He confirmed that, to his knowledge, his grandparents had never reported anything strange or unsettling during their time there. They had lived there for many years, and there were no stories of anything unusual happening at all. He kindly said he would ask his mother if she had any additional stories, and I waited for a follow-up but never got anything back. Reflecting on everything that happened, I genuinely believe something extraordinary occurred. Despite the fear and confusion, I leaned towards the idea that it might have been a positive presence of some sort, or maybe someone saying goodbye to me or my partner. It felt like a mixture of unsettling and deeply personal experiences, which might suggest an attempt to communicate or offer reassurance. Whatever the case, I'm just glad the activity, for now, has at least died down. My friend and I live in a rented house for job purposes in another city from our hometown. We rented this 2 years ago, and it was all good at the start. But after a few months, we suddenly started to get agitated at the smallest of things and got into ugly fights with each other, which had never happened before. One night when I was not in the house, my friend was alone there, and he heard his mum calling his name from outside the house. So naturally, he stepped out to have a look to see if she was outside, but there was no one. This was around 2 a.m. This matter was not discussed with me, and I was aware of such happenings in the house at that time. One day I was cooking in the kitchen and I suddenly felt a female standing behind me, a tall figure, and I suddenly looked back and there was nothing. Then I continued my cooking and heard knocking on the door, and there was no one. I felt quite strange, but didn't think of anything paranormal at the time. After that, continuously, I would feel someone peeking from the window and looking at me. We have rented a house which is on the ground and first floor, and the family of the landlord live on the second floor, and there's a secondary terrace outside our house and the main terrace above. I'll continually hear footsteps on the secondary terrace, and when I look outside there'll be no one. One afternoon when I was alone in the house, I was trying to get to sleep, but simply wasn't able to. I opened my eyes after flipping and flopping around, and that's when I saw this female entity above my face. I felt it was the same one that I had felt in the kitchen. I blinked, and it was gone. But I had felt it standing at the door of the bedroom staring at me. I shared this experience with my friend, and he said he's been having similar experiences. We tried to move out of the house multiple times, but all the situations turned against us, and we continually found it more and more difficult to do so. We had reached the end of our tether and decided that we needed to leave this house. The paranormal experiences were simply too much. We were being freaked out too frequently and really couldn't live there any longer. But for various circumstances and reasons, we simply didn't have the funds to be able to do so, as we were locked in a contract and had to keep paying until it expired. But we'd had enough. We told the landlord that we really needed to leave, and at first he was quite sweet about it, which was great. So we spent the whole day packing up our stuff and organizing another place to stay just so that we could leave ASAP. It was then that the landlord in the evening became rigid and annoyed and told us that we still had time on our contract and we couldn't leave. So we didn't get to move out after all, after that very challenging confrontation. But we're currently stuck here without being able to move and feeling very uncomfortable. I wish I had a solution to this problem. My daughter is finally talking to where we can understand most of what she says. We recently bought a house and finished moving in. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood outside of our next door, Karen. My sister and wife said that they heard my daughter talking with someone in her room. They heard someone responding to her as well. Upon investigating, there was no one there. I told them they must have been hearing things and she was just playing and practicing her speech. 2 days later, I had my first ever case of sleep paralysis. It was around 3 a.m. and I was drifting off to sleep. Shortly before or shortly after I fell asleep, I looked up and felt like I was being laid on. I heard a creepy exhale in my left ear that was really quiet at first and got very loud. I broke myself out by screaming, "Babe," but I guess I didn't scream because my wife was still asleep. I've never had that happen even in houses that were confirmed to be haunted. The following morning I walk into my daughter's room because I'm sure it was the same thing she'd been talking to because the presence was definitely an angry female. I started speaking so as to address the thing. I said that it was my house now and that they aren't welcome. I said that I will not be held down in my own bedroom and it will not terrify my daughter or talk to her at all. I said that I'm giving it the option to leave on its own or that I would be calling a priest. This was mainly to give respect to it since it was a human at one point and I wanted to give it that human option. After I finished talking, the air felt lighter and nothing happened for a good while. But fast forward 5 months later to tonight. My daughter's been inconsolable crying in her new room as we moved her across the house. I had been checking on her regularly to make sure she had what she needed and nothing was working. My wife came into the room and started talking to her and she uttered out that she was scared. When we asked her of what, she pointed to the upper corner of the room above her head and said, "She's up there." We asked who, and without an answer, I told her to come to me, face the corner she was pointing at and tell it to go away. She happily did and turned back to me. I was chatting with my wife about it, and she said, "Where did she go?" So I repeated the question she asked me, and she looked around and said, "She's right there," pointing at the ceiling between the two corners directly above her bed. I spoke to what I believe is someone who might be attached to the house, saying, "I thought we fixed this issue, but I guess we're going to have to call a priest since you don't want to leave." I told my daughter that if she sees her again, to tell her to go away. We left her bedroom light on and gave her some milk. That seemed to have done the trick to get her to sleep. Does anyone have any advice on what this could be? So many unanswered questions, but something is scaring my daughter, and I need it to stop. I have friends who live approximately 2 blocks from my home. They invited me over to see their place, and while going on the tour we walked down the stairs from the upper level and felt a significant shove to the back on my left shoulder. I laughed it off and thought it was a friend still up there, but when I turned around no one was there. This was my first experience. My second was at night while we were having a get-together with multiple people outside grilling. We had music playing and generally were having fun. We were listening to a CD that ended, but just kept socializing when a loud disturbing voice said my name that seemed to be coming from the speakers. Everyone immediately looked my way, and we were freaked out, but the alcohol and party kept going. My next experience happened when I helped put up a fence. After completing the fence, my friends left to get food while I stayed with the dogs. My phone began to ring, and I saw it was my friend calling, so I answered. But it turned out to be a strange male voice, asking if I could hear them, as it desperately faded to static. I asked my friends when they returned what it was they wanted, but they had no clue what I was talking about, and showed that they hadn't called me. I quit visiting them, but a few times in my own home I felt someone sit on my bed while laying down, and no one was there. After I moved, I haven't had any strange happenings. Friends say nothing weird has happened to them. I met another family that used to live in that house, and they, too, had nothing strange. It was strange and quite frightening, to be honest. I was a grown man and felt pure dread crossing that yard when walking 2 blocks home. This took place back in 2019, when I was 11. My grandparents live in a large Victorian-style home on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The building was made in the late 1800s, so that it has this classic old building look to it. Me and my family go down there occasionally from our home up near Bellingham, Washington, and in early September of that year, my family decided that they wanted to pay my grandparents a visit. I was excited to see my grandparents, but not so much as to go to the house. Up until that point, nothing out of the ordinary had happened in that house. The only thing it did was creep me out, especially if I was alone. The first day we were there, all was fine. My grandparents and I did our annual game of Clue, a murder mystery board game, and we enjoyed dinner, and that was basically it. But little did I know when I went to sleep that night that tomorrow would be anything but ordinary. When I got up the next day, I was excited because I was a die-hard Seahawks fan, and today it was going to be their first game of the season. Outside it was warm and muggy, so in my room, which was one of the 2 rooms on the 3rd floor, I had the window open with the fan on to let all of the hot air out. Later that day, my dad came up to my room and said that he and everyone else was going on a walk. I acknowledged him by nodding, glued to the Seahawks game that was on my tablet screen. He then left and shut the door behind him. What happened next still terrifies me. About 10 minutes later, I heard what I thought to be my mum yelling from downstairs. Somewhat annoyed, I stood up and turned the fan off next to the window to listen to see if my mum was actually calling me, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again. My mum was definitely calling my name. I opened the door, frustrated. I was missing a part of the game and annoyedly yelled out, "Yeah?" But there was no reply. I yelled down from the 3rd floor stairs again. Then my mum called back something I couldn't really make out. It sounded sort of like, "Want to show you this," but it was hard to understand. Annoyed but not wanting to ignore her, I hurried down the stairs to the 2nd floor, and I shouted out to ask where she was. I called, genuinely not knowing. She shouted that she was here. It sounded like it was coming from the 1st floor, but something was off here. The voice sounded muffled and strange. I played it off as just paranoia, so I walked down to the 1st floor and called out for my mum. Then I got no reply. I searched almost every room and no one was there. That only left one room, the basement, and there was no way in hell I was going down there. So I started heading towards the stairs, when all of a sudden, the basement door swings open. I yelled, spinning around, but no one was there. Then I heard footsteps walking down the basement stairs. Someone was definitely there. I then heard my mum say again, "Here," in the same weird muffled voice. I got chills down my spine. Something definitely wasn't right. I turned and ran as fast as I could up the stairs and onto the 2nd floor. I ran across the kitchen to the narrow staircase that led to the 3rd floor, and then I stopped dead in my tracks, paralyzed with fear. At the top of the staircase was a shadow-like person, saying in my mother's voice, "Here," and I screamed at the top of my lungs, practically threw myself down the stairs and out the front door. I then waited outside near the trees, glancing over my shoulder before my family came back from their walk. When I told them what happened, they didn't believe me. But seeing as I was crying and looking genuinely freaked out, they told me that they did believe me. I don't know if they were telling the truth, or if they just wanted me to feel comforted, but either way there was no way I was sleeping in that building. After 10 minutes of reasoning with them, I decided I would be more comfortable if I slept with my parents that night, and the incident still haunts me to this day. I rarely ever sleep in a room alone in that house anymore. Around 10 years ago, I was living in an old Victorian house with my mother. A few things happened in this house. Things were moved while both my mother and I were at work, and we would come home to things in obscure places, noises, etc., but we always just dismissed them as, "Oh, that's odd." One day I was sitting on my bed playing a game on my phone. My girlfriend was sitting at the foot of the bed doing her makeup in the mirror, and I had a floating shelf on the wall right next to the exterior wall, so no neighboring building attached. On the shelf I had several books, including my mother's old Bible, all in place, lined up against each other on the shelf, when all of a sudden the Bible comes flying off the shelf, and when I say flying, I mean it was flung like at least 5 feet. Me and the girl both shocked and confused, but I shrug and say, "That was weird. pick it up and put it back and carry on with my day. Later that night, my mother gets back from work and continues to come into my room and asks me how my day was. As I'm telling her about the Bible flying off the shelf, the second I finished the sentence, the Bible came off the shelf again. Now at this point I'm frustrated and confused. I tried everything physically possible to rule out any possibilities such as wind or force, etc., and I put it back where it was between two other books. I slapped the bottom of the shelf, kicked the wall of the shelf repeatedly, and did everything that could possibly cause anything on the shelf to move even a little bit, and nothing. The only way this would have been possible is if someone had their finger on the top of the Bible and flung it out. My mother just laughed and said, "I told you this place was haunted." I'm not religious and don't believe in the paranormal. I don't think it's rational to just label something as paranormal because you don't understand it. But now I kind of see what people mean and wonder what you guys think. We lived in Germany in the mid-90s. My dad was in the army and stationed there. We lived in this one house that was an apartment/duplex, the family unit on the first floor, another upstairs plus shared basement and attic. That was haunted. One night, my brother, probably of 8 years old, wakes up the whole house screaming bloody murder. He says he saw a cloaked shadow figure at the foot of his bed. The feeling he got of it was pure hate, like the thing didn't want him there. Years later, as we're sitting around drinking, my dad admits he saw it too when he busted into my brother's room. My dad, a very hard-ass army officer and not prone to lying, says he's always been sensitive to these kind of things. Another time, my other then baby brother is asleep in his crib at the end of the hall. Me and my other two siblings are watching TV in the living room, and my parents are out, so it's just us kids. I would have been 10 to 11 at the time. At the beginning of the hallway was my baby brother's little bear that said the Lord's Prayer when you press the button on the paw. Untouched, nowhere near any of the kids. That thing starts its prayer. I kicked that thing into another room and slammed the door. The attic was a no-go area. It just felt off, like you're being watched by something that hated you. And several times my mum would hear noises coming from the kitchen, going in thinking my dad had come home early for lunch, only to find it empty. This was army housing in Wiesbaden, a creepy place. I wish I could find another family that stayed there and compare stories, as hundreds of families would have lived there over the years. I had some memorable paranormal experiences when we moved into a new building that was built on desert land. From the beginning, I always felt a dark presence in my master bedroom closet. In the middle of the night, when I would get up to go to the bathroom, I always envisioned red eyes staring at me, but there wasn't a door on the closet, so I couldn't close it. I never had anything happen or saw anything. I had gotten to the point where I was angry, I was feeling this way, and one day stood in the doorway and said, "You're not welcome here, leave." Not too long after, when I was home in my bedroom on the phone with my mum, talking to her and folding laundry, I was mid-sentence when I saw a shadow person-looking thing walking out of my closet towards the shower. I told my mum to hold on, set the phone down, and ran into the bathroom, and nothing was there or the shower. After that, I never felt that heavy negative feeling from my closet again. I wonder if it did leave. What do you guys all think? Back in November of 2022, my family moved into a new flat after complications with our landlord with our old house. That house was without a doubt haunted. I saw figures, heard noises nightly from the attic, and it was the reason I started to believe in the paranormal. So I was a little disappointed that I wasn't getting anything in our new place. Fast forward to this last month, where stuff had been getting more active, while not to the extent of where I lived prior. I have been seeing more figures out of the corner of my eye and have been hearing more noises such as knocks and taps around the house, especially when I'm the only one awake. Hell, the reason I'm writing this now is because I saw a figure that looks identical to my brother walking in my mother's room, while both were in the living room. I was just speaking to them as I was walking back to my bedroom to see him. But that's not the part that confused me over the last few weeks. About a week ago, at 4 AM on another sleepless night, I heard what can only be explained as scratching on my desk, followed by something falling off it. I didn't think it was paranormal, so I decided I'd joke around with it, and called out to it asking if anything was there, and if it were to make a noise. And it responded by knocking on my desk. I spoke to it clearly for about half an hour. Clear knocks almost immediately after I asked a question, but only after some, only really responding to me when I wanted to confirm it was still there. Eventually, I started to tell myself it was just random noises, if not a bit coincidental, until it responded with the loudest set of knocks I've ever heard from anything. It's now been a week and I haven't heard any knocks apart from the one that night. I spent countless hours listening and have gotten nothing. Why had the activity started again after so long in a new flat? Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you'd like to sign up and get a whole bunch of perks, you can do that, links in the description. But why not watch even more spooky content? Links on screen now. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.